So one of the things we're going to need for this next assignment is going to be this script called dgvoropy. So you're not going to be able to follow along with this one, so you have to take notes, then afterwards do what you can. This dgvoropy is the guy who makes it. He just puts his DG at the beginning of it. It's a Voronoi shatter, and it's a Python script that he's using. So that's what the items mean. Now what this entails is, if you've ever been inside of Maya and you've seen, I'm going to go to sphere. Under the effects tab, there's actually effects, and there is a shatter here, and a lot of people gravitate towards this shatter because it's already inside Maya, but it's a pretty crappy shatter, okay? Typically what happens is you get really weird pieces where you would have, for any one of these three shatters, you'll get some really small pieces, then you'll get like a big chunk of it, and sometimes it's very difficult to actually manage that kind of shatter inside of our scene. With this one, the shatter pieces are pretty uniform. You will see that some are going to be small, some are going to be large, but they're pretty uniform and you get some pretty nice geometry out of the box. So I just search for dgvoropy and I get this. And it takes me to Creative Crash, and then you have to register for a free account, and then you download it. Oops. And then all you have to do is extract it. There it is. And then we just copy these items that we get from this into our scripts folder.
Is that going to be the same for Mac too?
Yes. It'll be the same for the Mac. The only difference is where you're going to put it on a Mac. Load.
How do you put it in?
That's all I did. Just copy it right to the scripts folder, right in your wherever your preferences are. Right inside the scripts folder, you just put those two files. The README is just for fun. But then once we have it in there, then we can use it. Now the trick with this one is that whatever you want your end product to look like, whatever you want your item to be, that's what you're going to model first, okay? So if you're like, I want to model this really elaborate building, but I'm going to try it out on the small one, you can't just translate it into it, okay? It's like whatever you build there, that's what we're shattering, all right? So if I go to, let's say, a cube, just to show you, and I say, okay, well, I'm just going to shatter this cube, and then I can smooth it out later. You can't smooth it out later. You can't do anything else to it later. It's just that's what it is, okay? So if you wanted this to have like rounded corners, or you wanted this to be whatever, then that's where you would add those things in there. So I'm going to add just some bevels to this.
It has to be one piece?
Yes.
Like even if it's combined? Or does it have to be like one giant geometry?
No, it has to be a solid piece of geometry, meaning I can't use a plane and do the shatter.
Well, like, what if you, okay, so you have another rectangle, whatever you want to call it, building.
If I went like this,
Combine them both.
right, it would work with that, I believe. But typically you'd want to separate those anyway.
Yeah.
Because what would happen is when you do your bullet on this, is that it would shatter this one, but then the second that this one gets shattered, then the other one's going to get shattered too. Even if it doesn't touch it, it's just going to fall apart. Okay, so you just do them separately, and then bullet them separately, and then have them interact separately. It's kind of like, you know, when we looked at the behind-the-scenes movie stuff, that they don't do like an entire building. They don't just grab the Empire State Building and just say bullet. They build the walls, they build the windows, they build all the different things to it, and they shatter them individually. And then they do all their other stuff, because glass is going to shatter different than wood, than plastic, than all the other stuff. Okay. So I'm keeping this somewhat simple. I just went with a cube and did that to it. I'm going to turn on, someone turned it off, display, heads up, nope, UI, and I need my command line. And down here in the mel script is where we're going to type in the command to pull that up. Now you don't have to remember what the command is. All you have to remember is that you have a script that says dgvoropy_UI, and we can try to copy that first and hit enter, and there it goes. Okay, so that's what we're doing, is when we run that little script, we're calling this script here. Once that script gets called, it does all the other work for us. All right, so we just call that one script, and then it works. Now, the way it works with this specific script is that it needs locators. Okay, so in order for me to shatter this object, I need to have locators all over the place. And then that basically centers where each piece is going to be. So if I have 1,000 locators, I'm going to get a lot more pieces than if I have 5 locators. All right. Now the easy way, the time-consuming way, that's a better way to put it, is to create a locator under create, and to move it, and then to duplicate it, and then to do that, and then duplicate it and do that, and duplicate it and do that, and duplicate it and do that, and just keep doing this for as many pieces as you feel that you want. But obviously, like I said, that's the time-consuming way. I don't like doing it that way. Okay. So under end particles, I'm going to create particles. So I'm just going to create an emitter. Okay. Now what this script is going to allow me to do is take these particles that are going to emit and convert each particle into a locator. And that way I basically am filling up that object with particles or with locators. So I'm going to turn this to a volume emitter. And that gives me a cube. And then I can just scale it up to fit. There we go. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just kind of getting it as close to that size as I can. After I'm done with this, I can delete anything that's outside of my building. Okay. So the first thing we did was we built our building. Then we created a emitter, made it a volume, and then resized it. So now when I rewind and hit play, I get a bunch of particles here. Okay. It doesn't matter that they're falling. That has nothing to do with anything. All right. So I can just hit play and just let them fall forever if I wanted to. Looking at the number of particles is where I'm paying my attention to. So there we go. You can see that better. So you can see all the particles that are there. Every particle will turn into a locator, and every locator will be the center of a piece. Okay. Now, if a locator is outside the box, it won't be. So just ignore those. All right. So if I want more pieces, I make more in the rate area of this emitter. Okay. Now you may be tempted to just say, yeah, let's do that. Let's put this up to 20 grand and let's just see what happens. But for your first one, you may not want to. Okay. Now for your first one, you may want to stick with 100. See how that goes. Then it's no big deal afterwards, after you have the process, to say, okay, 100's good. Now let me try 500 or 1,000. Every iteration you go, making it more and more, is going to take more and more time for all that stuff to happen. Okay. So I'm going to stick with, for this demo, I'm going to stick with 50. Okay, just because of how long this next process is going to take. So with 50, I have a bunch of points that are in here. So now I can grab the particles and do a particle to locator. Okay. Then you can see, instead of having particles, projector is horrible. There we go. Instead of having particles, I actually have locators at each one of those points. They're not animated, so if I hit play, you can see that the particles are still there. So if I wanted to, I can grab the particles again and do another particle to locator, and I'll get another set of locators. Okay? So you can do that multiple times if you realize, well, I just want some more. You don't have to undo it. All we're getting out of this is locators. That's the whole point of this checkbox right here. Okay? We would just get more locators. If you had specific areas where you're like, hey, I wish I had more stuff in this area, then I could shrink this down and I could scoot it up. Let's say over here in the corner, I want to have a lot more particles. So maybe over here I'll go like 150. There we go. And then I can grab this, particles locator. And now you see how in that area I have a lot more particles than I do anywhere else. Okay, a lot more locators. So you can play this game as much as you want to kind of refine these areas of where you want more or less locators, more or less pieces. All right. Once we're at the stage, oh, why did I close it? Good thing I pasted. All right, there we go. Once we're at the stage of having all these things, then we can delete the emitter, the end particles, and the nucleus. Those don't mean anything to us. All we needed were the locators. All the particles in the end nucleus and the emitter, that just got us locators. That's all it did. Okay. So now that I have this, then what I can do is just go ahead and clean up some of the stuff. So these locators that are underneath it, no effect on me, just delete them. No effect on me, no effect on me. I'm just deleting all these ones that are just pointless locators that I don't need Maya to try to calculate what's going on in those areas. Okay. I may decide that I want to take some of these and just kind of move them over. So you can do that too. Just kind of grab particles or grab locators and just nudge them wherever you want to move them. Okay. So now that I have all my locators here, I'm just going to grab them all as a group. So I'm just going to grab all my locators, group them into their own group, and delete all that stuff. Okay. So now I'm going to grab my cube, grab the group, and I'm going to take this width down. The width is how far apart each piece is going to be from itself, or from the other ones. So at 0.005, you'll have a tiny gap, which obviously we don't want a tiny gap between the pieces. That doesn't make sense. So we make it 0. The color here is the color of the inside of our piece. It doesn't matter because you would most likely want to texture it something else later. Okay. Now I'm going to hit Voronoi Shatter. Now as long as I've selected these in the correct order, yes, there we go, we get to watch this thing happen.
So you have to hit cube and then the group?
Yes, cube and then group. You do it the other way, it doesn't work, so then you just flip it. So now what it's doing is it's rebuilding this entire thing. In the areas where there's sparse locators, bigger pieces. Areas where there's tighter locators, more pieces. Up at the very top right, you can see where my Voronoi Shatter is progressing. You can see how many pieces I'm going to get. 304 pieces are going to come out of this thing. Okay. Now imagine if you would have done 1,000 particles and 1,000 locators, how long that would take for that to happen. Okay. So you just have to be aware that this process is something where we just have to let it go and do its thing. After it's done with this, it may have came up with an error. Okay, math isn't perfect, programmers aren't perfect. There might be a spot inside here where there's a hole in our building. Now we would have to decide, well, let's undo it, go back to before we did that Voronoi Shatter, and then figure it all out. Or maybe deleting some locators. Or we shoot from the other side of the building and ignore the fact that there's a hole on the other side, right? So many ways we can do that. This is actually when it works on a smaller scene. It actually goes very quickly, and it's actually kind of a fun thing to watch. In the middle of a lecture, it's actually kind of boring to watch it do its thing. 3. Boom, 304. Okay. So now let's look at the result. As you spin around, you can see there are a couple pieces that look kind of weird. Like that one there looks kind of weird. And that one there looks kind of weird. But our hope is that once we texture it, that all of that stuff goes away. Right now we're looking at it as just kind of like a gray mass. Once we texture it, those shaded areas will be disappeared. Okay. Now we do get, here's our original cube. Oops. So if I turn this back on, there's the cube. So we can always get that back. We can just wipe this group. Here's our shard group. We can wipe this shard group out and then redo it doing less locators or more locators or whatever. Okay. So now that we have this, here's all the pieces. And if we look at it, 304 pieces, just like it promised. Okay. So now what I need to do is, if you look, my pivot for this is right at the center, right at the very origin of this. If I were to go through and I made this a bullet object and it fell, what would happen is this piece that's up here, it thinks that the center of the object, the center of the mass, is way down here. So it would fall in like this big arch. Okay. Kind of weird how it does it, but it does. All right. We're done with this, so I'm just going to delete it. I'm going to center pivot. There we go. So each piece is now center pivoted. I'm also going to hide my group here. Let's hide that. And now we can make it a bullet object. So we go to FX. We make sure that bullet is loaded. Plugins. Bullet. What? Bullet? Because it's stupid. You can name your stuff too. If you start to get into multiple bullet objects, you have a wall, you have 2x4s, you have wires, you have whatever. You may want to start labeling your stuff so it makes more sense. I'm just going to call this building. Okay, so now, boom, it exploded. What happened? Because I'm at frame 30, Bullet in 2016 is automatically updating. So I'm just going to rewind it. I'm going to hit play. Whoa, wrong button. And it's going to explode. All right. So now why is it exploding?
You did something wrong.
I didn't do anything wrong.
Interacting?
It's interacting. Why is it interacting?
That was not set. Rig, set. The rigid set.
Initial state.
You don't have it sleeping or something, that's it.
I don't have it sleeping, number one, is one thing. Also, I need to take my collision shape and make it a hull. And take this margin off. Okay, because we have 0 tolerance between them, then that has to be 0. I don't know why those turn black all of a sudden. And then initial conditions, initially sleeping. Now, before I do that, I would like to test it. Because what should happen is when we hit play, this whole structure should just fall straight down. Okay? The reason it's exploding is because they are touching like this, but their collision is making them touch like this. So it pushes them apart. All right? So I like to keep that off while I rewind and hit play and verify, yes, it's just falling straight down. So now we can make it initially sleeping. Now we can glue the shapes. And I don't know who stuck that there. We'll just stick that out. And now we can throw something at it. Okay. Now if we remember, the top left corner here is where I'm aiming for, because that's where all this stuff's going to happen. All right. So we're going to take that and we'll make that a active body. It's a sphere. Yes. And we're going in the negative z direction, so and give it some initial velocity in the negative z. And what else? Ground. I need a ground on this. Oops. So I'm just checking the ground checkbox. I'm also going to check my fixed frame rate of 240. That's just standard. I always try to do that. And then I rewind it and play. As you're rewinding and as you're playing stuff, make sure that you're hitting the rewind button right here. Don't click and drag back to 1 because Maya will try to calculate all those frames back there. All right? So it's always best to hit rewind. Also, even if you're at frame 1 and you make changes to Bullet, Bullet doesn't remember that until you rewind it and it re-registers all that information. Okay? So I always rewind it, and then I probably should save this. I haven't saved anything. Yes, sir.
What was the point of using button plane again?
Just so that when it falls, it lands on the ground. Otherwise, it would just go straight through. Okay? Because what's going to happen is once the ball hits it, it then becomes active, and then the whole thing could just fall straight down. I don't want it to do that. I want it to collide with the ground. All right, so now, oops, we should give this a little bit of mass to, let's see, 20. Okay? Now we're colliding with 304 objects. So in that small area, there might be 100. So if this has a mass of 1, this has a mass of 100, there's no match there. Okay? So we have to make sure that this has plenty of mass plus velocity in order for that to happen. Nothing. See, it just didn't stand a chance against it. Let's take that mass up.
500.
And again, it all depends on what we want to do. Boom, there we go.
That still barely went through.
Now you see, for the most part, these pieces are staying on the ground because they already have kind of that flat plane. But again, we could have deleted all the locators around that area except for the one area we wanted to shatter. It's pretty sweet. I like that piece. It's kind of doing a flip backwards. That's cool.
It looks like some of how the Matrix was done. How the agent punched the wall.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's shot.
Boom. There we go. And then again, we're at the playing stage of what do we want to happen now? Okay. Now you see it did exactly what we wanted to do. It shattered that little area right there, leaving a bunch of little pieces, but then the rest of it is a big, messy mass of junk. It's pretty sweet.
You put it glued?
Yes. It's glued, and that's why it's not moving. Now, you see that this is kind of like weird, like these pieces are hitting the ground and they're spinning around, right? The ground itself does not have very good parameters. There's basically, it's a ground, something for it to interact with. So if we want it to interact correctly with whatever ground we're hitting, then what we should do is add an actual plane and have it interact with that actual plane. See, it just looks weird, like breakdancing. All right, so let's go to Bullet. Just so you can see, I'm turning off my ground plane. I'm going to create a new ground plane. And I could also, add some stuff to this. I could take these pieces here and go to Control E, pull it down. And again, whatever you want this to look like, that's what you shape it as. So I'm going to just give this a little bit of beveling. Oops. No. Bevel. Go. Okay, so now we'll just take this, delete history, and then make it a passive rigid body. And for this, because it has this dip in here, I'll just make it auto compound. All right, rewind it. We hit play. It looks like the building's toppling. It is. Now that could be on my plane. Yep, I have a collision margin of 0.04, so let's take that off. It's still kind of toppling a little bit. All right, let's go to our side view and see. Maybe it's touching it. And it might be touching it very slightly. See how small that is right there? All right, so we gotta just nudge that down just a bit. All right, so that's right there. Okay. I may still need to adjust it, but for right now, we'll just pretend it's perfect. And now the ball is going to go into this little pit. All these pieces are going to go into this little pit as well. And then I could take the friction up on that ground plane, and now they won't all be spinning around. You can see already that they're interacting much better than they were before. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Now we're just at the playing stage again of what do we want to happen. There's other stuff that we can do for this, but that's, essentially that's it. That's all we would do. We created the object, put a bunch of locators around it using that script so that we had particles, and then we shattered it using the Voronoi shatter, and then we just made it into a bullet object and started throwing stuff at it. And again, we could take it and have, I think someone mentioned this last time, what if it only had a mass of 10 and then it hit, blink, and did nothing, but then another one comes along and boom, or 20 of them come along and boom, 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 and you start hitting it, just pulverizing it. Okay, and that might be interesting too, just to see this fall off. Dramatic. Okay, so there's lots of different things that we can do with this kind of thing because we understand those basic things that we can adjust. We can adjust the speed on the ball flying at it. We can adjust the mass of the ball. We can adjust the mass of the object. Also, scale plays a huge part of this too. This thing is not to real-world scale, right? So it's not like an enormous building in New York. My object here is create. Oh, they have it right there, I think. Yes, they do. Distance tool. Anyway, it's under create measure tools distance tool, and we can just go doot and doot. Okay, and so this is 33 centimeters tall. So that is not very big at all, right? Like 10 inches almost, or a little bit over 10 inches. So it's only like that big. So if a ball hit it and it would shatter, that's what's going to happen. If this was in a movie, they would typically try to build this to somewhat of a real world scale. Not exactly, because some things just don't work like that. But sometimes they'll actually take this object, do it to real world scale, and then shrink it down for another simulator that works better at a smaller scale, then make it bigger for something else that works at a bigger scale, and then put all the stuff together. Okay? So, so that's that part there. Now the other thing that you can do is that we can export this just like we did the other one. So let me make this a little bit more interesting. So let's go back to 500 like we had before. Pull it up, pull it back. And this is going in the Y direction. I'm going to give a little bit of downward Y. Nudged over a touch, up a touch. There we go. All right, so I like that. All right, so again, I'm going to go in with some more frames here, like 250. I'm going to grab my objects. Let me save this again. I'm going to do my Alembic cache. Export all. Time slider, step 1. Something that came up last time, if you're doing a texturing to this, specifically like on Patrick's, he did cards, so he laid out all the UVs, made his bullet object, and he wanted to export all that information. Make sure you click on UV right inside here. And I also clicked on right color sets too. I don't think I did anything, but UV right is the main one you want to do. Okay, so then we export this out, BulletShatter. And then exports our BulletShatter out to our scene. And then we could, again, bring it into another file. Now, what I'm going to show in the next one, after this is done exporting, is how we could then take that bullet information and apply a texture to the building to give it somewhat of a building-ish look without having to go through and texture a whole bunch of that. So for that, I'm going to use Google. And I'm going to take my usage rights to labeled with reuse with modification. There we go. So like this building here, that looks like it's a pretty close replica of my building that I have. Anything that I don't want in the picture, I would airbrush out. Where is my P drive? And I just threw this under my space scene, so just ignore that. You would set your project. Okay. So the lamppost, I don't want it in there. It's not really part of the building. I would take it into Photoshop and airbrush it out. Same thing with the flag, same thing with these. You'd want to get rid of that kind of stuff because it just doesn't make sense for what we're doing. Okay, so I think that's exported. Let's find out. So now we'll go to our cache. We'll import our cache. Gorgeous. Okay, so we can delete this one. We don't need it. We can delete that one. We don't need it. We can delete the locators. We don't need them. This is our plane. We need that. That's our sphere. We need that. We need that. We need that. We don't need the front view. We don't need these perspective and sides. We don't need the bullet solver. There we go. So those are 3 things that we need. The building solved, the plane, and the sphere. Those are the only 3 things that I need from this. Okay. So before I do the texturing, here's another cool thing that we can do, is that we can go under that Alembic node, okay, because all of these are reading that same Alembic node. Well, that one doesn't do anything, so there it is. And I can change the speed. So if I put this at like 0.05, here it comes. You'll see that the ball is not even going to hit it until way down here. Maybe more than that. There we go. So now I'm going to play it back, and now we got slow motion. Okay, now you may have seen that the building actually kind of like started caving in before the ball even got close to it. right there. Okay. Now it's not writing this information out. This is just this is just an estimation of what would happen. Okay. So basically it takes the ball's position here and the ball's position here, and if we slow it down, it just kind of makes up all these frames in between. So we don't get a perfect simulation, as you can see right there, but you can get away with it a lot of times. See, boom. And now you get these like slow motion effects that are happening inside here. Yes, sir.
How do you only do, the whole thing is slow motion right now. How do you only make it a certain portion of it?
Excellent question. So I'm going to take my speed back to 1. Okay. And you'll see that I'm back to where it was. So it only goes to 150-ish or 250-ish. This time thing up here, I'm going to break the connection to this time. And its time is actually linked to our limbic files. So as I type a number in here, it's actually just reading from my hard drive what frame 20 looks like, or what frame 40 looks like, or what frame 80 looks like. Okay? So what I can do is I can actually keyframe that time to make it do that. So if I go to frame 1 and I set a keyframe, then I go to frame 100, and let's see, nope, that's too far. 30, there we go. Okay. So that's at 30. So now, see how it updates the time. Right there. And then I can go to frame 500, let's say, and I only want to go up 10 frames. Or, yeah. All right. And then I'll go after this. And then I'll just go to the other 250. Okay. So now, here it comes, super fast-ish. Now it's slow motion matrix effect. It stopped. And then
It stopped.
That's what happened in the movie.
there we go. Okay. Now the reason that it stopped is because of my graph. So let's go to the graph editor. And if you look at the graph for this, it's set to easing in and easing out of this. So what happened was there was just this plateau where there was literally like no change happening inside there. So, or very little. So we would just have to adjust it. So we can slow it down here. Actually, I just make that go like this. Like that. Picks up speed. Yeah, it's like way too little of a change probably for that whole area. So let's just make that smaller. There you go. I'll do that. Watch what happens there.
Just teasing.
Boom! Okay, so you can create some very cool stuff right inside of Maya just by playing with some of those settings. Another thing you can do is you can actually render your stuff out. So if you go to your rendering stuff and you're going through all your render settings, oops. Down here where it says by frame, you can set this to like 0.05. And then I'll say renumber. And then what that means is that it's from frame 1 to 10. It's not going to go frame 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's going to go frame 1, frame 1.005, frame 1.01, frame 1.015. Okay, so it does these like incremental rendering out, and then you can put those in After Effects and then tweak it from there. Okay, so lots of cool stuff that you can do. It's a matter of playing around with it. All right, so now for this building that I want here, my building to look like. Okay, obviously I would want to look at this and kind of figure out the angle that my camera would be. So looking at it like this, back up, and then, okay. That might be an exciting angle, but I think this one might be a better angle because I can see all the action happening right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that image in as a background. So I'm going to go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. There's my building. Okay, I'm going to go to Wireframe and I'm going to try to line up the building as best I can. So now what this means is that I have to really kind of tweak my camera a bit, okay? Because you can see the perspectives are not perfect. Also, my image plane is kind of bigger than my view, and it's hard to lock it in. So under View, Camera Settings, I'm going to go to Fill Vertical, and there we go. Now it's filling the entire vertical plane. Okay. Then the other thing that I want to do is change my perspective. Okay, because I'm just not getting the right perspective. It's close, but it's not perfect. So I'm going to go click on my camera again, and maybe make this a 30 millimeter. There we go.
You're using UVs based on camera?
Yes. Okay. So now I'm going to rewind it. I'm going to click on this building. I'm going to say lighting and shading, assign. It doesn't matter what you assign. I'm just going to assign a Lambert. Okay. It matters what you assign, but I'm just going to assign a Lambert. And I'm going to right click on my file and do it as a projection. I'm going to take this to be a perspective and take this camera projection to be a linked to that camera, filling vertically, and then find that file. Okay. So now if I hit 6, what should happen is that my building now resembles that one. Okay. Now you can see it's not perfect. You can see it's a bit off right here. You can see down there it's a bit off. Up there it's a bit off as well. All right. So that's just going to take a little bit of tweaking. Let me go back to my projection and then say match camera resolution. And then again, I can kind of tweak this to get it lined up. That's not the right way. No, that's not it. It should have worked better when I went to that film gate. I'm just going to turn that image plane off. The image plane will get you closer, but I think I need to tweak it manually. So I'm going to delete all by type image planes. There we go. Let me take my resolution gate and take it, or my focal length, and take it down a little bit more. All right. Now the other thing we can do too is inside of Photoshop we can kind of tweak the image to pull it out a little bit more. I'm not going to get all into that, but we could. And go the other way. Back to 35. There we go. Now again, this is not going to be a perfect setup. You can't just like slap a building on there and have it look perfectly like a building. So I'm going to make a new camera, and now my new camera, you see this side looks horrible, right? But that side kind of looks like a building, okay? Not from that angle. From the angle we were looking at it before, like that. Okay. Now to lock this in, I'm going to click on this and go to texturing, create texture reference. Okay. So now when I hit play, it should make a texture reference. We may have to render it to see that. Yep, there we go. Okay, so it's not doing, you can see the windows over here now, it's not doing that weird projection thing that it was doing in this case. Okay, it actually is locking those pieces into that building to get it to do that. So that's one way you could do it. The other way is just lay out your UVs ahead of time, do them by sides if you wanted to, and then go from there. In this case, you know, I'm not too concerned with it. We can just use flat coloring on it, because again, the point of this assignment is just kind of playing with the settings to get some neat effects. Let's delete that texture reference. There we go. And there that is. And that's that. Okay. All right, and obviously it limits you too, because you can't go through and, let me just fix this back. It's bothering me. You can't go through and animate your camera spinning around. There we go. So now it's linked back up to the time. Oops, I want it to be frame, not time. There we go. Okay, so now we can actually have this thing kind of spinning around it and doing whatever. All right, so play with that and go through and just try to make a building and then have it chatter. And it doesn't even have to be a building, like we saw with that one guy's on YouTube, how he did the Tigger. There you go. There's some bullet tests right there. So you can see in these, he's not using any crazy textures. It's simply just some objects and having those objects shatter. And that's what's impressive about this. It's not so much about getting it to look exactly like a building or any of that.